This afternoon, we're pleased to have with us a distinguished political and social commentator, Rabbi Aryeh Spero. Rabbi Spero is the author of Pushback, Reclaiming Our American Judeo-Christian Spirit. He's written many articles that have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Washington Times, National Review, Human Events, and many other periodicals. And he is a frequent speaker on television, where you have seen him on The O'Reilly Factor, Fox and Friends, Megyn Kelly, Neil Cavuto, MSNBC, C-SPAN, and many other media outlets. He has testified in front of the House Judiciary Committee. He has addressed the Heritage Foundation, and he was the first rabbi to publicly endorse Ronald Reagan. He is an acclaimed public speaker, and he has inspired diverse audiences around the country. Would you please help me welcome Rabbi Aryeh Spero.
Thank you. Machik, right? Professors Nash and Machik, and guests, and all of you younger people, future leaders in America, it's a pleasure to speak here again in behalf of the Northwood University Conference. Capitalism is not simply an economic system. It's much more than that. It's a gateway for a full, robust life, a life where there's independence and dignity and health, and where you can be the best that you want to be and can be. Capitalism provides wealth, not stagnant wealth, but wealth creation, and it's wealth creation that grows and includes more and more people. It creates the middle class. Because of capitalism and free markets, we are not seen as simply cogs, one among the masses, but as individuals who can pursue dreams. Universities and colleges have many departments. One of the departments is the Department of Economics. But I have a theory, and the theory is that the Department of Economics is highly influenced by the other departments in the university. The Department of Economics is influenced by the departments of philosophy, and literature, and sociology, and history. I appreciate speaking for Northwood because it has an economics department that extols the free market capitalist system, and it does, I suspect, because its overall view of life is very much in sync with the idea that we, the individual, should be allowed to achieve and be the best that we can be. And its view of history and sociology makes it possible for its economic department to be as pro-free market and capitalism as it is. There are other universities that live under an elitist attitude, and they actually have problems with the whole notion of the individual. They're more comfortable with an idea where there's a certain aristocracy, an elitist group that cares for you and knows what's best for you, and they will take care of you. Now that completely stands against the idea of the individual taking care of himself and deciding what is best for himself. But such is the outgrowth of elitism. And so let's turn for a moment to universities where the departments of history and sociology, literature, are full of deconstruction, rewriting the history of America to somehow condemn capitalism, full of people who themselves are so involved in self-worship that they feel that they know what is best for you, and they are unwilling to allow society to be governed by the multi-million choices made by hundreds of millions of individuals across the country. They're not going to put their faith in that, but rather in themselves. And they have history and sociology and literature departments that thereby have an influence on their departments of economics. So that in good institutions such as Harvard and Yale, you have a professorship in the economic department that instead of extolling the virtues of capitalism, extols the virtues of socialism, finds all the warts in capitalism, and puts out many graduates who leave the collegiate world and enter the world of real life already corrupted and tarnished against our free market capitalist system. And it's interesting that institutions such as Harvard and Yale would be so often negative regarding our free market system when they themselves live off the free market capitalist system and prosper thereby. Harvard and Yale have investment funds that do very well, actually. They find the best investment analysts who invest the endowment money in stocks. Now, there is nothing more capitalist than Wall Street and the stock market. And Harvard has done very well in its investments in capitalist free market stock markets. It has a tremendous endowment fund, mainly from men who have gone into business and been very successful, and in gratitude to their alma mater have donated tremendous sums that they made through the free market capitalist system to Harvard University. And yet, their economic department and so many of their departments glorify in how they find the warts in our free market capitalist system. There's a certain elitism there, because you know the only thing that will produce a middle class is a free market system. The world has always known wealth, but wealth was concentrated in the hands of the kings, the noblemen, the aristocracy, the select few, or those who had businesses but they were close to those in power. People like Solyndra, who were close to the people in power because they had donated to the administration and thereby received massive investments into a boondoggle that didn't work. So there have always been people that have had wealth without capitalism. What free market capitalism has done is provided millions, high percentages of people to become themselves wealthy enough to live a dignified life, wealthy enough to choose the life that they want, wealthy enough to feel confident to speak their mind, to speak truth to power. And those who deride capitalism, though they do so in lofty terms, yet they themselves live off the fruits of capitalism. In effect, what they're trying to do is to shrink the middle class and to diminish the possibilities of the individual. It's elitism. It's once again trying to concentrate power and wealth, because power comes to those who are wealthy, in the hands of the few. A new aristocracy, an aristocracy of those who think they know better, and because they know better, they think they are better. We see this hypocrisy again when we look at Hollywood. Look at all the stars who are making obscene amount of money that they would never make in business, but they make because they have been endowed by a pretty face or a nice rugged face. They can learn their lines, and they make tons of money. And they're out there always supporting the latest socialist-type candidate, the latest socialist-type cause, always standing behind redistribution of wealth and telling us of the cruel, hard realities of the capitalist system, yet they themselves have made their money, have received their platform to speak precisely because of the capitalist system. Every studio that hires them is listed on the New York Stock Exchange. The distribution of the movies that make them wealthy through royalties happened because of a free market capitalist system, and yet they are the first to endorse every left-wing, anti-free market, anti-capitalist candidate or notion. Well, maybe some of them feel guilty. After all, many are young people from backgrounds like you and I, and all of a sudden they're making $20 million a year and $30 million a year. And there's a certain guilt. Guilt is not always bad. Sometimes guilt keeps us from sin. Guilt sometimes makes us ask forgiveness from those who we have hurt. But guilt is bad if it puts into motion things that hurt others. And when people, because of their guilt, start to convince other people against a free market system that gives people possibilities, then they are hurting countless people. And that's no way for a person to assuage his guilt. If they're guilty about the money that they make, let them give it away. 90% of it to causes, good causes. There'll be plenty left for them. But don't back candidates who will put into place positions that will stifle creativity, stifle business, and make it impossible for other people to have upward mobility. There's a man in New York, but he also originally was from Hungary, named George Soros. And more than any other man, he has been funding every left-wing cause that's ultimately designed to hurt business. Not the business of General Electric. General Electric will not be hurt. But the business of Main Street. You see, there are two types of businesses. There's Wall Street and there's Main Street. I'm not worried about Wall Street. I'm not worried about the financial people. But I am worried about Main Street. I come from people of Main Street, a family that started its own business, and through that business lived the American dream, lived with dignity, where my father was able to provide us a home in a middle-class street, in a middle-class neighborhood, and could send us to college and dress us well and give us values. It's Main Street. It's the businessman on Main Street who's hurt by overregulation, who's hurt by Obamacare, who's hurt by environmental rules that go beyond treasuring the environment to actually worshiping the environment over the needs of man. Main Street is hurt by these policies, these left-wing policies, never the multinationals. And yet George Soros has made his money through capitalism. Actually, the only form of capitalism that I might be uncomfortable with is a speculator in the currency markets. Now, all of these things are needed. We have to hedge. There have to be constant bets on every commodity, including currencies. That's what keeps a certain equilibrium. But with the currency market, there have been cases when taken too far. Some of the speculators have brought down governments and have hurt people. And yet George Soros, who is the ultimate capitalist, is funding those organizations that would set in policies that would deny you, the middle class, opportunity in the free market. Mr. Soros engages in a type of capitalism that I'm not in favor of. It's actually quite ruthless. As the talk goes on, you'll see that what I favor is the capitalism of the Judeo-Christian ethos, which is a capitalism with morality. Not capitalism, as George Bush said, compassionate capitalism. I'm always afraid of the word compassion when not limited to the individual deeds and instead foisted onto government, because that sometimes means redistribution of wealth. But moral capitalism, which is a capitalism that's not ruthless, that's the capitalism of the Judeo-Christian ethos. And you ask yourself, Mr. Soros, who has made his billions in capitalism and yet wants to implement policies by funding organizations who are anti-Main Street capitalism, if perhaps he's motivated, as were other men in the past, in concentrating the wealth in the hands of the few as opposed to the many. During the campaign, we heard President Obama say to people who had built a business, "You didn't build that." Well, that's all part of the class warfare rhetoric. And that also reflects someone who himself has never built a business. Because if you have built a business on Main Street from scratch, you know that you did build that. I came from a family that did build a business. As I was telling the gentleman at the table, I came from a family where my great-grandfather, when he arrived here in 1880, did not speak English, had no money, but he worked hard. And in America, if you worked hard and you sacrificed, you could build a business, and our family did. But they built it. Yes, they built it. It was they who were called on Memorial Day and July 4th and Sunday and Labor Day, somehow back to the business because there was a fire, or because the pipes broke in the winter, or because for some unexpected reason the trucker called and said, "Listen, I have to deliver on July 4th. I can't be there the day before, the day after. You're going to have to come to the dock and pick it up." It was my father who went back to business he went back to the business every night. There were so many nights we didn't see him for supper. And as I told the gentleman at the table, it was my father and grandfather who came home so many weeks. I remember back in the 1950s, and they told my mother and my grandmother that there was no check this week for the family because business wasn't good that week. But you have to pay the workers. You have to pay the workers first, and they paid them 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, up to 5 weeks, and we had no checks for those 5 weeks. We did build the business. Only a person who's never owned a business could say such a thing, or only a person who lives in a world of theory where we demonize the businessman. We demonize the successful by implying that they made their success on the backs of others through cheating or through cruelty, could say such a thing. But because of such an attitude, things are being put in place in the last 4 years, if it's Obamacare, if it's regulations, if it's the hostility to pipelines, to fracking, all of these things are being put into place that will hurt not Mr. Obama, but the middle class. Mr. Obama did very well by writing 2 books. But those books gave him a lifestyle precisely because of the free market system. His publisher is part of a company that's listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And there are rules of capitalism where if you sell a book, it doesn't go to the government, but after your publisher is paid and the distributor is paid, you, the individual, because of free market capitalism, receive profits, royalties from your book. And Mr. Obama has made between what? $2 and $2.5 million on those books, many of which he was helped by, with others writing the books with him. And he is the beneficiary of capitalism. And really, one has to ask themselves, are we now entering a period between academia, Hollywood, and a political class that, while they themselves benefit from capitalism, want to make it harder for the middle class to engage in free market capitalism. You know, I had a friend who was a writer. I don't know if you know him. You're all younger than me. He was a friend. We did things together. His name was Norman Mailer. Norman was from New York. One of the books that he wrote was The Naked and the Dead. Very famous writer in his time. Interesting fellow. I liked Norman. He was a man's man. I wouldn't call him exactly liberal, because on certain social issues he was not liberal. But he didn't like the free market system. That was Norman's failing. And at the end, our friendship, it died. It withered away when he realized that I liked the free market system. And I asked him once, I said, Norman, you become wealthy because of the free market system. Your books are published not by obscure publishers, but the foremost publishing houses in the industry, listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Because of the free market, you get royalties from these books, and some of these books sold in the millions. And after that, some of these books, plays were made, or movies were made, or documentaries were made. And all because of the free market capitalist system, Norman, you became wealthy. Well, Norman was like many in the arts community. Somehow he felt that artistic work was worthy of profit. If you produced a wonderful novel, a painting, a piece of music, you basically were doing that altruistically for the sake of art for art's sake, and profits were a byproduct. But the businessman, he goes into business specifically to make money, so his money is evil, it's tainted. So the free market system was okay for Norman and his friends on Broadway or Hollywood or the writers or the painters or the artists or the musicians, but not for that businessman, because he goes into business to make money. Well, listen, that's a very elitist view, and it's also not true. Because if Norman and his friends knew from the get-go that they wouldn't be making any money on their books or their movies or their art, I don't think they would do it. They would take up another calling. Matter of fact, the greatest pieces of art that we have in the world were precisely because someone was paid to do it. And there are hundreds of thousands of pieces of art that could have been but were never born because no one commissioned someone and said that they were going to pay. Leonardo da Vinci did The Last Supper because a noble family decided to pay him for it. And he did the Mona Lisa because a noble family in Italy decided to pay him for it. There are many other ideas in the mind of Leonardo. They never came to fruition because he was not going to get paid for it. The David in Florence by Michelangelo, the Sistine Chapel, these great works of art. That's because the artist, Michelangelo, was paid to do it. He was commissioned to do it. When they didn't receive commission, they did not produce these works of art. But beyond the fact that even artists do things for money, Hollywood, they consider what they produce art, and they do it for money. They make movies that will make money for them. But the man in business, I think, is highly misunderstood. Most people don't go into business initially with the idea of becoming a millionaire or a billionaire. They are infused by an idea. Something came into their mind. They have an idea. They want to make it tangible. They want to distribute it. They know something out there, but they have a better way of making it. They're infused by the idea. I am sure Bill Gates, when he was working out of his garage after he left Harvard before he finished graduating, at that moment he wasn't thinking about the millions or billions. He was animated by that which is deep inside the human being, the creativity. Created in the image of God are we, and we become animated to bring forth ideas, as does the artist. Businessmen are artists too, except that we can't see the beauty in it as we do in art. But the beauty comes about in another way. All of the things produced by business give us a beautiful life. Heating, air conditioning. You all grew up with air conditioning. I didn't. It's a beautiful thing to have air conditioning, and that was produced by a businessman. Heat. You all go to bed at night, and it's warm throughout the night. When I grew up, it wasn't that way. Our homes were not heated with natural gas. They were heated with coal. And we had to go down early in the morning to throw the coal in so that we'd have heat when we got up in the morning. Before we went to bed, my grandfather used to throw the coal in. But by the time 2 o'clock in the morning came, the coal was already expired. So we all would get up early in the morning, we'd throw the coal in. Now we have central heat that just comes. It's calibrated to come because of thermostat. That was an idea of a man, and he's made our life more than beautiful. He's made it possible. It's given us health. All the drugs that we have are a consequence of a man having an idea, or a group of people, of men and women in a research department who know that they were going to get paid by a company, have an idea, and it's made the longevity of our life possible. When I grew up, our grandfathers all died. It was 64 years old, 65 years old. It was sad, but no, he lived a good life. He lived till 65. People now live 85, 90, as long as they take care of themselves. Because we have these miracle drugs. These miracle drugs are possible because when someone has that idea, he's inspired, number one, but number two, he knows that with this, if it sells well, he can feed his family, he can make a company, and companies, although we were told they become rich, but there are years when companies really have bad years, and they rely on the profits of the years before to sustain them. Throughout recessions, we get a whole new crop of winners and losers. Those that are able to sustain and live through the recession, after the recession, they will be stronger. Those that are not able to live through the recession will die. Those that survive will be stronger because there's less competition. What enables a company to survive during the years of a recession or a semi-depression? It's living off the savings, the profits that they made years before. Profits are very important. They're important for research and development. They're important in order for a company to be able to survive the bad days. We're told profits are evil. Businessmen want profits. That's somehow evil. But the artist who wants a profit, who wants a good wage for his art, that's not evil. We should get beyond that childish way of thinking that only things of art are somehow valuable in themselves. But things that are manufactured are prosaic, and they're only produced because of profit. Number one, profit isn't bad. Without profits, things don't get produced. And number two, most people go into business, they're animated by an idea. I know because I've been in business. And when I would get up in the morning in those formative years, it was never about looking at my bank account. It was, what could I do to bring the idea to fruition? How do I get people interested in it? How do I get it to market? How do I improve it? With free enterprise, with a market system. And what is capitalism? I said last year, and I'll repeat it again. It's a very simple idea, but it really didn't come to fruition till the 1500s. Capitalism is people pooling their resources together, investing in an idea that someone had that will eventuate in a product, be distributed to the public. Profits hopefully will be made after costs are covered, and there will inure to the investors a profit for the investment that they make. Now, they take a chance. Unlike the worker who gets a guaranteed wage for what he does, the investor gets no guarantee. He's investing in an idea. He's investing in a circumstance. There is no guarantee. That's why when the money does start coming in, and it comes in the form not of wage but of profit, sometimes it's more than what the laborer or the worker gets because the man initially, the woman initially invested in something that put him totally at risk where there could be no return and there could be tremendous loss of money. This is what capitalism is, but it wasn't until around the 1500s, the 1600s in Holland, in Amsterdam, because of the Judeo-Christian ethos, the Protestant Reformation, that capitalism, where people would actually invest in the ideas of others, that came to bear. Until that time, money was in the hands, as I said, of the political class, noblemen, the aristocracy, the landed, the kings. That was all changed with capitalism, and there came, after that, the middle class that we all grew up in, and the middle class that we think has always existed, although it has not. What happens when you don't have a free market system? You have people who have ideas, but all they remain are ideas in the mind. There is no investment or money to bring these ideas to fruition. And when ideas remain in the mind, instead of being produced, they benefit no one. And society is the poorer for not having ideas brought to market. You don't have those drugs. You don't have that heat. You don't have that air conditioning. You don't have that automobile. And what happens? You are young people, and hopefully all your ideas will come to fruition. What happens if you'll have a lifetime where you've had the great ideas, but there was no one to invest in it? There was no research and development department to hire you so that you could use your talents. You can end up at the end of your life being very embittered. There's nothing more embittering than knowing that you could do something, but the circumstances were not available for you to do it. And you never could be who you were destined to be. Such a man was Leonardo da Vinci. There was probably, now that we know his life, there was probably no man who was more brilliant and more inventive than Leonardo da Vinci. But he died embittered. He wasn't happy simply because he did the Mona Lisa, or he did the Last Supper, or he painted St. Jerome. Art to him was a sideline. His main passion in life was invention. You wouldn't know it, but Leonardo da Vinci invented the first mechanical car. Henry Ford invented the first car run on fuel. But the first mechanical car was invented by Leonardo da Vinci, and Leonardo da Vinci lived from like 1450 to 1510. How come you don't know about that? Well, there was nobody to invest in his idea. There was no middle class. He lived in Florence, which at that time was one of the most prosperous states in the world, Florence was. But there was no middle class, there was no free market system, there was no capitalism. There were families, some wealthy families like the Da Vincis. If the Da Vincis invested in you, the aristocrats, fine. But they weren't interested in investing in mechanical things. They wanted to invest in things that would bring them immediate pleasure and sensuality. There were principalities, there were governments. If the government would invest in you, that was great. But then you had to look to government to do it. And governments in those days didn't think of creating products. They paid for what they had to, and basically they were in the business of supporting the noblemen that supported them, and the noblemen, Cylindra, you know, you get the idea. A certain type of fascism, where the state supports those who support them, and those businessmen who support the state in return get supported by the state. It's a type of fascism. So Leonardo had no one to invest. There was no capitalism. He invented the first pistol with a wheel lock. You don't know that. We know it now because 300 years later we have his papers, and there are all his drawings and all his explanations, but he had no one in those days. There was no capitalist system. He couldn't go to a venture capitalist and say, listen, I've got this great idea, a telescope. He invented the first telescope. There were no companies. There was no free market system. There was no venture capitalist. There were no hedge fund people. There was no stock market. He had to rely on the good graces of the Medici family. They didn't want telescopes. They wanted him to create beautiful parties for them. The principalities, the government wasn't interested in that. The submarine. We have diagrams, writings. We have his works. It's now 300 years later. But all of his stuff was hidden for so long, except for his art. I can go on. The tanks. Cameras. He invented camera. It wasn't Robert Fulton who first discovered the magical power of steam. It was Leonardo da Vinci. Hydraulics. But nothing came of it because he did not live in a time when there was capitalism, free market, and investment. And he died an embittered man. I've been asked to speak today, and it's about capitalism. And you ask yourself, why would they ask a clergyman to speak about capitalism? I should speak about sin or salvation. And it's because, in my theology, I know that God wants from us to be as creative as we can, to be autonomous beings, to take care of ourselves, and he wants us to grow. He wants us to leave this world different than when we first arrived. We come into this world and our hands are open, and we're supposed to leave this world clutching that which we produced. Growth is what life is all about. A loving God wants his creatures to grow. Nothing has provided the individual the chance to grow as has the free market system. Nothing has provided a life of dignity as has the free market system. And God wants us to have a life of dignity. Nothing has given us greater health than has the free market system. And a loving God wants us to be healthy. It's wrong to think that what God wants is simply for us to pray to him for health. He wants us as mankind to do what we can to be healthy. And then we just simply pray to him that what we do should be efficacious. We can't pray to God for dignity. We're supposed to create the circumstance that gives us dignity. And then we pray that what we do will be successful. And in the beginning, God created man, and he created man in his own image. What does that mean? It means that there are elements within man that mirror that of God. God is creative, and so should we be. God is autonomous. We should be. We should be independent. God is responsible for himself, and so should we be. Our first moral responsibility is to take care of ourselves. It's not to ask others to take care of us. That's the crux of the Judeo-Christian ethos. Do not ask others to take care of yourself. That's laziness. That's stealing their time. That's stealing their resources. You, as God, should take care of yourself. Morality is to fulfill all the obligations of those things we have freely chosen. Our first moral obligation is to take care of those things. We are responsible to take care of those things we have freely chosen. Our wife, our husband, our children, our family, and then our country, because we freely choose to live in this country. So we take care of it and make sure that it's able to defend itself. That's the purpose of a country, is to be able to defend its citizens. And we make sure that the country should be able to live by its theme, which in America is liberty. We do those things because we choose to live here that will ensure the liberty of our country. There are those who would tell us that no, each one of you in this room was born to take care of them. It's your responsibility to take care of them. That, my friends, is an immoral assertion. Those who are sick, truly sick, and cannot take care of themselves, then part of our Judeo-Christian tradition of charity is to take care of them. And those that are old and feeble and cannot take care of themselves, our Judeo-Christian morality says take care of them. But what makes the Judeo-Christian ethos singularly unique is that it says to man, you are an individual with dreams, with great possibilities, but with the responsibility of taking care of yourself. Not claiming some type of entitlement that others should take care of you. We were not placed on this earth to be serfs and slaves for other people. For a man or a woman to work all year, and at the end, 50, 60% of his earnings, and earnings represent your life, your hours, your time, your everything. For that to be given to someone else means that you are a serf to them. We have to help people for those things that they need, not those things that they want. People who come and don't assert a sense of entitlement, but really have no food for themselves or their children because they find no employment, because there is no employment. These are people that we should help with their food and their shelter, their clothing. But we are under no obligation to take from our own children and redistribute our wealth so that they can have cell phones. No. Or that they can have babysitters. My wife and I pay for our own babysitters. My wife and I pay for our own cell phones. And as Professor Nash knows, I don't have certain apps on my cell phone because I can't afford it. Maybe because too much of my money is being taken from me by the government to give other people cell phones with apps and texting. That's not charity. That's redistribution of wealth. 6 days shall ye work. To me, the clergyman, one of the greatest ideals is the ideal of work. Getting up every day and working. 6 days shall ye work, on the seventh day shall you rest. Many people know about the rest part, the seventh day, but they forget 6 days shall ye work. Unlike other religions, work in the Judeo-Christian ethos is paramount. It's not so in other religions. In other religions, they think that the man of contemplation and the man of learning is the ideal, and he should simply be supported by others. We believe that work brings dignity, and we believe that work brings virtue. Aristotle told us that the good life is a virtuous life. The virtuous life is one that is lived with virtue. And you know, work does that. Work inculcates in us wonderful habits. We learn to get up in the morning. That's the most important thing. You know, what happens, young people, when they have to go to school, they go to school, but then when it's vacation time, they often like to sleep late, and they think that maybe is a lifestyle. There's no school today, you can sleep late. Getting up in the morning is one of the first lessons, primary lessons in life. You get up in the morning. The birds get up in the morning. You know, when God gave the Israelites during their 40 years in the desert, he gave them the manna from heaven, and people say, oh, how wonderful. You see, God supported them for 40 years. They had to get up in the morning, because it says that when the sun came up and was up for a few moments, it then melted the manna, and it was not there. There was no manna. The lesson from God was, you must get up in the morning. Their work was to get up in the morning and to get the manna. That was their job. No, the manna was not delivered to them in their tent. No welfare check was delivered to them in their house. They had to get up to get it. Same thing with gleanings in the field. The farmers in the Bible were entitled to keep their crops, but they left certain things for those who were poor. The corners, gleanings forgotten sheaves. Let's say you were plowing and 2 or 3 of your sheaves of grain were left, you left that for the poor. But unlike the situation we have today with the federal government, with redistribution of wealth, with the notion of entitlement to other people's earnings, or the notion that somehow you don't have to work, the Bible was not that way. Those poor people who wanted those gleanings or corners, they had to get up and get them. The farmer was not obligated to collect them and then just send them out through the mail to people and say, here are your gleanings, here are your corners. You had to get up and get them, and you had to get up early because other people were going to go. Work teaches us the virtue of getting up. It teaches us the virtue of grooming. You know, even the greatest people, I've met some of the greatest people, and I've had meetings with them that were not so formal, and they can be quite grungy, you know. The hair's not done, and they're not shaven, and maybe they're not showered from the night before, and they're in their pajamas or their jeans. Work teaches you grooming, and grooming is good. These are all part of virtue. Work teaches you cooperation. One of the things that has made America great is how people cooperate with one another. Don't appease one another. You stand on your principles, but you learn how to cooperate, and that's what work does. These are wonderful virtues. Work also teaches you transparency. If you want people to buy your product, they have to trust you. And that's what transparency is. People have to be open, they have to be forthright. And all of this is very good for the social order. Work teaches you gratitude. There's nothing more important to gratitude. Every day, gratitude to the Almighty for making you healthy. Now, I understand that this is a little bit far-fetched right now for many here. You're 20 years old. Of course you're healthy. It's a given. I thought so too. But then you get older and your friends are dying. And your parents are gone. People that you know are sick. Health is not a given. It's a given at 20 years old. But when you get older, you'll thank God for your health. Gratitude to those that supply you a job. It's a wonderful thing. And that's what work does. That's sometimes my antipathy to unions. The unions were so strong here in Detroit. I worked with unions often in Cleveland and Canton. There was no gratitude to the company for providing them jobs. It was a given. Hey, my grandfather worked here at this auto plant, and my father worked here. It's my birthright, my God-given right to work here. And not simply to get work here, but to get paid here, and to demand more and more and more. No sense of gratitude, no humbleness. Without gratitude, there's no humbleness. Workers have to have a certain sense of gratitude. Nothing in life is guaranteed. You're not entitled to a job simply because your father or grandfather had that job. You're not entitled to every perk in the world that even the owner doesn't have simply because you're a member of the union and your union has the power to demand it. Gratitude. And with gratitude comes humbleness. And that's what we're taught by with work. And the more that we can make sure that in this country there are jobs, the more people will be working, the more they will learn the virtuous life. There are two approaches now about how we support people. One is the historic American approach, which is you get up and you go for a job. And we have to do whatever we can to make jobs possible, to make manufacturing possible. Then there's the other side that we've seen over the last 5 years, that somehow owners are people that are making it on the backs of other people. Owners make too much money. There's not enough regulation. There's more energy put into stifling opportunity than in creating opportunity. But don't worry. We'll take care of the people. We'll give them all types of programs. It's called redistribution of wealth, off of the backs of those people who do get up and sacrifice and take the risks. Not only is that wrong economically, but it will destroy the middle class. What has been great about the American person is he's been in character, the rugged individual that says, I don't want to be taken care of. I'm not simply an unidentifiable cog among the masses who punches in and punches out. I'm an individual. I want to take care of myself. I was created in the image of God. I don't want to be a member of the nanny state where I'm simply a receiver. I grow up. I'm not a child anymore. I want to take care of myself. The more people that are going to be taken care of by the government, the more that sense of individual ruggedness, that fine American character, will be stolen from future people. It's done through class warfare. As I was mentioning at the table, class warfare is a sinful, sinful gesture. What class warfare does is it sows envy in the hearts of men. And it says, you don't have because somebody else has. That sows envy and bitterness. The job of a leader of a country is not to sow envy in the hearts of the citizens. Not at all. The job of a leader is to say that there will be opportunity out there. Our talk was entitled Capitalism, Theology, and its many rooms or many chambers. You know, throughout history there have been certain rooms or chambers of knowledge. One chamber is the chamber of wisdom, and philosophy is the method that we use to gain wisdom. There's a chamber that deals with medicine, what it takes for human beings to remain healthy. One of the chambers of knowledge has to do with economics and a person earning a livelihood and society being robust. Another, of course, is the chamber that I like that has to do with metaphysics, that which is meta, above physics, religion. What's our purpose? What does God want from us? What does God hope for the societies that embrace us? And there's, of course, the chamber that deals with ethics, living a virtuous life which is good for the social order. And then, of course, there is that room that deals with the arts, poetry, literature, and history. And finally, there's that room that deals with science and mathematics. I think that we've made the case that each one of these rooms of human life, endeavor, and knowledge is manifest and made that much better because of capitalism. We are healthier today because of capitalism. Our livelihoods are better because of capitalism. And theologically, God wants us to be strong individuals and to live a life of dignity, which has been made possible in the last 300-400 years because of capitalism. Every society that has gone to socialism has become poorer. And that's not just an abstract idea. That means millions of individuals are poorer, and they're less healthy, and they have less dignity, and they have more stress. And a poorer society is one that will not defend itself. Because of the socialist policies in the last 4 years, this country now is so in debt that when it looks to finding money, what it does is it cuts defense, defense, defense. There's a certain amount of every department where there's a layer of fat, but this group that's in power now will go way beyond cutting the fat. They'll get to the core. They need the money to fund the welfare state, to distribute the wealth that gives them the votes that keeps them in power. When England did that, when I grew up, England was still a prosperous country, but it went socialist after the war and it became a weaker country. Nobody takes England seriously. And we're now living in the last couple of years where people don't take America seriously because we've cut back so much in our defenses in order to expand entitlements to redistribute the wealth. A country that doesn't defend itself is not only in peril, but what's in peril is all of Western civilization. Because the only thing that will keep us from the darkness that will take over is a strong America that believes in liberty and a strong America that defends liberty. Let me conclude. The fight for capitalism is your fight. The fight for free markets is your fight. Your future depends upon it. Capitalism is not some abstract thing that you learn in the Department of Economics at Northwood University. Capitalism and free markets is your ticket to a life of dignity and livelihood. A life where you will have the power to speak your mind. People who are independent and do not need the government to support them will speak up when the government is infringing on their rights. But people who look to the government for their job, they keep silent. Everything that involves your future is dependent upon us winning this fight for free markets and capitalism. And you're speaking now, you're listening now to a religious man. I don't believe in the ruthless type of capitalism exhibited by the George Soros and many people on the left. It's a capitalism with morality. All capitalism, everything in life has to have certain limitations. I'm married. You think marriage is just you do whatever you want? There are limitations. Everything comes with limitations. Everything has rules. And the rules are not necessarily to rein it in, but to make it successful. For something to be successful, it needs its own rules. So capitalism needs its own rules. It can't be ruthless, but it has to be based on competition. Over the years, you will hear people talk to you about capitalism being heartless. On the contrary, the most charitable people are businessmen. And if you look to the socialist countries, there's so much heartlessness there. So many lines for years in Russia. People didn't have food, they didn't have medicine. But the elites, they had their dachas, they had their villas, they had their medicine. Those that speak in the name of socialism, that elite, don't worry, they will always be taken care of. They will take care of themselves. They will combine with the political class. The fight for free markets is the fight for the Judeo-Christian ethos, which is my primary mission. I was a rabbi of synagogues for 40 years. I've left that, and I go around the country speaking about the importance of the Judeo-Christian ethos. It has nothing to do with rituals and rosary beads or wearing yarmulkes. The Judeo-Christian ethos is an attitude towards life. It believes in the individual, and it believes in liberty. Proclaim liberty throughout the land to all the inhabitants thereof. It believes in social justice and equality, but not the equality that the French Rousseau thought of, or Marx thought of, where we make everybody equal materially on the backs of other people's work. Equality simply means, what is equal justice? What is equality? Equal justice under the law. That no matter who you are, rich or poor, whatever your race or background, that when you are brought in front of the court, there's one set of laws for everyone. And our public institutions are open for everyone. That is social justice in the view of the Judeo-Christian ethos. And for the citizen, one set of laws. For the next couple of years, you'll have the luxury of being taken care of primarily by your parents and being taught by your professors. But when you graduate in a couple of years, you will become the soldiers for this fight. This old soldier is getting tired. The ideas are fresh, but the energy, which you have, the energy, it dissipates. We rely on you to carry forth this fight. Never be embarrassed about fighting on behalf of capitalism, because when you do, you're fighting for liberty, you're fighting for America, and you're fighting for a dark force that is taking over the world. The linkage between radical Islam and left-wing socialism, communism, they're linking up to take away our freedoms. This is your calling. This is why we put the money into your education, so that you will preserve the freedom that was handed to you by predecessors that were wise and were great. God bless you all.